My name is Joshua Horry. I'm the Accessible Technology Coordinator over here at UC Davis and the Accessibility Coordinator for LibreVerse Accessibility. And I do have a little quick update for those of you who are unaware. There should be an Otter link coming out inside of the chat room for those of you who want some notes of this transcript of this video. And I will hand it over to Ethan, who would then hand it over to Nicholas to introduce each other.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ethan Turner. I am one of the lead full stack developers here at LibreTexts, and then I will pass it off to Nicolas.
Hello, everyone. My name's Nicolas Crisosto, and I'm an accessibility consultant that works with the LibreVerse to do accessibility conformance and help folks like Ethan make sure that LibreVerse is accessible.
All right, we have 26 slides to go through today, and we'll move on to the next one. So the agenda will be what is the LibreVerse is what we'll be talking about, the accessibility conformance, LibreTexts Libraries, going over a little bit of that. The accessibility checker is another thing that we'll be going over, LibreCommons and the Conductor, LibreStudio H5P content, LibreText adapt content, and then we'll finalize with a Q&A where we can do a really quick demo on how to use maybe some of these tools. So the nature of textbook is evolving. So the LibreVerse is an ecosystem of next generation textbooks where we're adapting Adapt H5P with Jupyter notebooks, query of formative homework, as well as forums, and using JavaScript to tie it all together. We have Commons and Conductor to help keep track of everything that's going on. We have a bot server to help out with a lot of the automation, as well as learning analytics for those instructors who need it. The OER content in the libraries are decorative with supportive technologies, such as all of this in here, to make it an all-in-one tool for a lot of our instructors. Going on to the next slide, slide 4.
Right, so the LibreTexts Accessibility Standard, we're using WCAG WCAG 2.1 level AA. And as of March 2023, we have updated information. So of the 50 WCAG 2.1 A and AA success criteria, the LibreTexts libraries have a conformance level of supports for 46 or 92% of the success criteria. 3 are partially supports, 6%, and 1 is still at does not support, 2%. That's specifically for the reflow WCAG 2.1, more aimed at mobile users. And so we're working on updating the support for that success criterion, and the other 3 that are partially supports are some programmatic issues that are already being worked on by our developers. So please check back to our accessibility statement page for additional updates. Next slide.
And we're on slide 5.
And on this slide, we have a link to our LibreTexts accessibility statement. And this is where you'll find the updated accessibility conformance reports, ACRs. We report by feature, such as the LibreTexts libraries or adapt, the homework system. We also report when it's appropriate by user, either student, instructor, or general. And we're also in the process of developing usability guides and roadmaps when there are pieces still of the LibreVerse that need additional explanation or remediation. So if we're still working on fixes. Next slide.
All right, slide 6.
Take it away, Ethan.
Okay, so like we mentioned a minute ago in Joshua's beautiful diagram, the LibreVerse revolves around our now 15 different libraries. We have 8 STEM libraries, which are bio, chem, engineering, geosciences, math, physics, stats, and medicine. We also have dedicated libraries for the humanities, social sciences, business, and workforce, which is vocational and trade education. All of those libraries are more or less focused on post-secondary, but we do have the relatively new K-12 library that's been growing steadily. Finally, we have a library dedicated solely to content in Spanish, and late last year, we translated almost all of our content, at least in our bookshelves, to a new Ukrainian library. So that has been growing very rapidly. We're really happy to see that. So while each library focuses on very different subject matter, they all run on the same sort of wiki-like technology that allows us to revise and curate the content even across multiple pages at once, while maintaining a nice record of our changes. So that's really helpful for us as we address accessibility issues and concerns with the content itself. For example, figures, tables, headings, and we'll go into more detail about that in a minute. And again, though the content is different in each of the 15 libraries, we make every effort to ensure that both the editing and the reading experience are consistent and familiar across all 15. I will mention, if you do have questions about getting involved with authoring on one of the libraries or multiple, or you need assistance in that manner, reach out to us. We're always happy to help. And we'll move to the next slide, please.
All right, slide 7.
So here we're looking at what we might call the student-facing view, where you're not really signed in or able to edit any content. I won't spend a terrible amount of time here because we're actually piloting a new interface that I will discuss in a moment, but I'll touch on a couple things. One of those that is great for readers, it's a little hidden here, I apologize, is a breadcrumb bar towards the top. And that allows you to quickly jump up levels in a book. So, you can imagine while you're studying, you need to kind of quickly jump around. But probably what's most useful is what is kind of open in this little bit of a modal dimmer here. It's our sidebar. We call this the sidebar. It's this blue menu along the left-hand side of every page. And what's open here is this readability menu. And when you open this, you get, as you can see, sliders to adjust the text size on the page, another to adjust the margins on the side of the page, and even an option for dark mode if you prefer that. We also have an integration with Beeline Reader, which allows you to apply color gradients to the text on the page. Like you can see a little bit here, there's a blue and red gradient applied in the screen grab. And the team at Beeline has found that this sort of technique with the color gradients moving along the page helps you move your eyes along the page, improves focus, reduces screen fatigue. So with LibreTexts being sort of a web-first kind of project, we're happy to provide that. We do hear some good things about it, and we definitely encourage you to give it a try. And then I'll mention, find something here to notice up in the upper right-hand corner, this link called Enter Reader Mode. And then with that, I will ask for the next slide, please.
We're on slide 8.
Okay, so now what's up on the screen is what we call reader mode. This is kind of a stripped back, cleaner interface to the libraries. This project was spearheaded by our product manager, Yassine, and we've already heard some great feedback on it. We hope it'll be a big improvement to the reading experience, not just in terms of the looks, but also in terms of usage with accessibility tools like screen readers. Reader mode places an emphasis on the content itself, and on larger screens, it provides plenty of negative space to prevent from being distracted by other parts of the site, maybe that don't even apply to readers. On smaller screens, it provides still an unobstructed view of the text without letting links, buttons, things like that leak into the content. And then, of course, it maintains a nice table of contents menu and breadcrumbs for navigation, which is open on the left-hand side here. And then it folds all of our sort of extra enhancements that Joshua just mentioned into an expandable toolbar up at the top. We are really excited about reader mode. We hope people will find it helpful, and we hope it'll help them focus on what they're reading, not where they're reading it or how they're reading it. We're considering flipping to reader mode as kind of the default. So when students initially visit the library, they see this, you only get kind of our current interface if you're actually editing content. Most people are not. And then, like I said, provide that when people are editing. So if you are particularly fond of that idea, do let us know. Yeah, and we can move to the next slide.
Okay. Slide 9, where we're going to talk about the library accessibility checker. I do have a link for the list of checks that it can perform on here. It's kind of a blog post of all the different things that it can do. And on here, I have an image of our accessibility checker in action where it has an orange dotted line going across an image. And then there's a blue dotted line going across the accessibility checker issuing a warning stating that image alternative text should not be the same as the file name. And it asks for a replacement by the user. And then there's a button that allows the author to submit the alternate text that they would prefer to have, and it automatically fixes it in the background. So you don't have to know code, you just fill in form fields. But we also do this for URLs, we do this for headings, we do this for alt images, we do this for tables. So we've made tables much easier to make accessible. We're also doing this for labels like form fields and buttons. And we're also doing this for abbreviations now. So that is one of the new features that we just got in recently. We're going to go over into the next slide, and slide 10, where we'll talk about the more LibreTexts library accessibility features such as MathML and MathJax. So inside of here, you'll notice that if you go inside of a math textbook, everything is done in LaTeX in the background, but we're using MathJax to automatically convert the math into MathML to be read aloud by screen readers. So anybody can interact with your math textbooks, and authors can be using the language that they're most familiar with, and then the CK editor will do all of the edits for us in the background. On here, I do have 2 images, one of them of a math equation where it's a binomial squared equals the first term squared, multiply 2 times the product of terms plus the last term squared. As a visual mathematical equation. And then I have another paragraph where it has we have inline, which is math inside of the paragraph, as well as display math, which is math not within the paragraph, showing how it's accessible within this page. So it does support screen reading software. We have tested it with VoiceOver, we have tested it with JAWS, and we have tested it with NVDA. We have tested it with multiple browsers such as Safari, Chrome, Brave, Edge. You name it, we're probably played with it. We find that some of the best experiences so far has been NVDA and Chrome, as well as or NVDA and Chrome has actually just been our best experience. We found some issues, 1 or 2 issues with JAWS, and we found 3 or 4 issues with VoiceOver that we have some fixes in for. We're going to go over to the next slide, slide 11, where we're going to talk about yet more accessibility features. So we've actually got some container boxers that are really making content that's a little separated from the rest of the text. So on here, we have about 5 images of different types of container boxes where it's showing definition term. Example 1, interactive element, note, as well as learning objectives. All of these have been set as a heading 5 to make sure that our screen readers can really quickly navigate to it, but we have also made them into landscape sections. So they don't have to go by heading if they want to. So if there's too many headings on the page, they can choose to select by landscape modes. And that way they can really quickly navigate to just the container boxes, which can be very, very important. So our accessibility review bots, we do have the bot that looks for long alt text, heading structures, empty links, suspicious link text, as well as iframe labels. So we're trying to, well, iframe labels might consist of YouTube videos, Vimeo videos that have been embedded inside of textbooks. So we're trying to make sure that those are all labeled too for our screen reader users in case there's multiple videos that they're trying to navigate to. This will make it that much easier. And all of this is automated through our accessibility checker or through our accessibility review bots. Moving on to the next slide, slide 12.
And on this slide, we have even more library accessibility features. So part of the upgrade for accessibility is LibreTexts support for Able Player. Able Player supports both audio only, video only, and content that is synchronized media, which would be video with audio. It has support for synchronized closed captions, transcripts, and support for separate audio description tracks if the narration in the video is missing description of meaningful visual information that needs to be added in afterwards. The content is provided by the content authors, and LibreTexts, as with many of the other tools that Joshua just described, provides content authors with the ability to ensure that their content is accessible. Another reason we're using Able Player is the keyboard functionality. It's very keyboard accessible, and it includes keyboard shortcuts for users, whether they're using assistive technology or not. In addition, LibreTexts is in the process of converting from the export to PDF function to export to EPUB, which allows users to print books at a low cost. And it also supports maintaining the accessibility features that our content authors have worked so hard, or maybe not so hard, using the accessibility checker, and it was done automatically for them. But to maintain those accessibility features in the exported version. Exporting to PDF, for example, isn't going to support the math ML or the math accessibility, but EPUB, once the conversion is done, will support that. Next slide.
Here, just to briefly describe the images, we have Able Player with all the different tool features that are available, which is speed, replay, fast forward, or rewind, fast forward, transcript, speed up, slow down, settings, and volume. On the next image, it's basically a transcript synced over with the multimedia content, so that way you can interact with both. And now on slide 13.
Okay, so switch gears a little here. So about a year and a half ago, we introduced a new technology into the LibreVerse that we call Commons and Conductor. The reason for the "and" in the name is that it's kind of a two-sided or a bimodal system. On the public-facing, I guess more reader, more student-centered side, we have a central catalog that allows you to browse through all of our texts across those 15 libraries, and even some of our homework resources from Adapt or H5P or LibreStudio in a central location. You can also see the information like summaries and licensing, which we think is a pretty cool feature, and use the table of contents on each entry page to quickly jump to a section or a chapter. Each entry page also provides all of the links to our available download options, and then a link to our bookstore to actually order a on-demand physical copy. So the central catalog, and that's what's up on the screen here, there's maybe 6 thumbnails for a few of our books in our whole catalog. A central catalog is what we call LibreCommons. It encompasses all LibreText resources regardless of the author, the campus, the original publisher, maybe if it was imported to our platform. But each university or college that is a member of our consortium, the LibreNet, has the option to have us spin up their own campus commons that creates a catalog featuring resources that maybe the instructors on their campus have created, or maybe resources that we have in our corpus that they'd like to reuse that might be relevant to their course offerings. No matter which kind of commons you're using, the central or sort of the network of them, the hope is that it provides a more efficient way of finding these OER resources or these texts that are relevant to your courses without having to manually search through our libraries or rely on Google, Bing, Yahoo. Nicholas has already completed a first round review of Commons and its accessibility compliance. And on the development side, we are definitely looking forward to improving its interface to keep supporting as many of those criterion as possible. If I can get the next slide.
Slide 14.
So if you decide to create an account on the system, which we really do recommend for content authors or anybody sort of working with us, you get access to the Conductor side of the system. Conductor is a really powerful, we believe, project organizing and planning tool for building and reviewing OER content in and of itself. But what really gives it value is its framing around and sort of integration with the other LibreVerse technologies. And in that regard, it's getting more useful, more intelligent, more productive every month, we like to think. So what we have on the screen here is the sort of landing or dashboard page. On the left side, you kind of have a quick menu bar to some helpful links, especially for authors. In the middle, you have a grid of your recently edited projects, and you can also pin projects that you access frequently. And then on the right side is system announcements. Kind of, we like to share updates to the platform that might be important for users. Next slide, please.
Slide 15.
So on this page or this slide, it's an example of a project page inside Conductor, which shows you some of those project tracking aspects, a little bit of the metadata we like to allow you to store about your project. And then there's this kind of rainbow menu bar at the top, which leads you to even more organizing tools for your project. So we're really excited about Conductor. We think it's quite useful. It's helping us streamline, as Delmar likes to say, it's helping us clean up our inboxes. And hopefully, if you're working with us, you find it useful. Maybe you already use it or you're now interested in using it. We could easily spend an hour or so going through every little part of Conductor. Thankfully, that's already been done. We have introductions to it up on our YouTube channel. I believe Delmar is hosting a session tomorrow as Open Ed Week. And of course, again, we're always open to questions. I will mention we just recently implemented new file storage capabilities. So your project can also act like a Dropbox or a Google Drive if you're kind of used to using those tools for working with your team and collaborators. And we hope that's just another incentive to kind of make the shift to Conductor, if you will. The thing I want to point out here is this teal accessibility progress meter and menu button up at the top. Those tie together, and the accessibility tab takes you to your sort of dedicated area just to accessibility and compliance of your project. So now we are on slide 16, I believe. So this is on this accessibility page. This is the accessibility compliance review matrix. The review matrix allows you to sync your text table of content from our libraries and then check each page against 30 or so different criteria that our team uses as well to ensure that your content is up to par and is as widely accessible as possible, at least within the current state of the platform. So as you can see, there's a matrix on the left-hand side. You have each section of your page or of your textbook, and then along the horizontal is each criteria, and then it's grouped within sort of categories like images, keyboard navigation, links, and so on. So as powerful as this is now, we're actually planning to break it down even further in the hopes to make it easier for authors. We'll be doing that by splitting it into 3 smaller matrices. The first one is checks or fixes that need to be performed manually by your team. Another 4 criteria related to the platform itself, which would be completed by our team and kind of synced out to everyone. And then a section that will be completed by what we mentioned earlier, accessibility review bots. So these are scripts that will run automated tests against each page and check off pages that pass or flag ones that need review. And then those will continuously run over all pages so that the review matrix stays up to date, even as content is updated or maybe as we're sort of mass curating things. That also brings us closer to the ability to generate a conformance report or an ACR at the text level that, again, you can then share with interested parties. So we hope to have these enhancements rolling out later this year. Of course, it's still very useful, at least we hope so, and we certainly welcome you to give it a whirl if you host projects in the libraries or if you are currently building one. We think this fills a longstanding need in the community, and as far as where it's kind of a first in the OER world, these tools help us ensure the accessibility from the start rather than going back and kind of doing it as an afterthought after the text was initially constructed. So using all of those tools, especially the per text ACR, We're really hoping to continue breaking down the barriers to adoption for OER in the classroom. And if an instructor can see that their materials are accessible or ensure it for themselves, that's just one more reason to switch away from the traditional model. Next slide, please.
Slide 17.
So, okay, switching gears again, another LibreVerse tech, we'd like to take a look at LibreStudio. So LibreStudio is a publicly browsable catalog of formative assessments built on this framework called H5P. If you're not familiar, H5P is a content framework for the browser that's really flexible, and you can create some really cool interactive activities and assessments as complements to other OER content. So assessments made in LibreStudio can also be used in LibreTexts Adapt system, which we'll talk about more in a minute. And then you can create assignments and grade students on their interactions here. H5P comes with accessibility concerns, but Studio has seen a lot of improvement in that arena in the past year or so. So that's what I believe Nicholas will focus on in just a moment. But if you're interested in using Studio to create assessments or activities, we have a couple of videos on our YouTube channel. We may have a session on it this week. Hopefully I'm not mistaken. And again, always open to questions. And next slide, please.
Slide 18.
What we're going to be talking about next are the LibreStudio H5P library accessibility features. And we're going to go over some information from the H5P Accessibility Guide, an overview of the accessibility conformance of H5P activities. Also, some information about the accessibility by H5P activity, and then some examples of alternatives to provide accessible exercises still using H5P. So we have links to those three areas that we're going to be talking about on the next slides. Next slide.
Slide 19.
So first we have the H5P Accessibility Summary. And this was as of 2021. H5P is not, we don't control, or LibreText does not control the kind of baseline accessibility conformance or functionality of the H5P activities. So in conjunction with the Academic Senate for the California Community Colleges, the ASCCC, we did some testing, and rather than rate the H5P activities as based on full conformance that we would for our own products, again, because we don't control the functionality, rather than supports, for example, we rated H5P activities as whether they would be usable with best practices, because we can't guarantee that any of the H5P activities will be fully accessible. Rather than partially supports, we were able to rate some of the activities as usable with workarounds. And then similar to does not support, we rated some of the H5P activities requires alternative activity. And then there were a few that were not evaluated because of the type of activity and the functionality. So I believe like one example is QR codes and what was built into that particular H5P activity. So additionally on this slide, we have definitions of each of the conformance levels that we provided for the H5P activities. Usable with best practice is defined as the activity requires minimal adjustment by content authors. Usable with workarounds is defined as the activity requires significant adjustments by content authors. And the conformance level requires alternative activity is defined as the activity is not usable by some users. That might be specific to users who require magnification support, or users of screen reading software, for example. Or it may be users of the keyboard alone, users who would not be using the mouse, for example, to interact with an activity. And then not evaluated is defined as the activity type was not evaluated. we're trying to be as, very kind of explicit as possible here. And then the counts are usable with best practices, 5 of them or 10%. The usable without workarounds, 25 of the activities or 50%. Requires alternative activities, a significant number, 17 or 34%, and not evaluated were 3 or 6%. So on the next slide, we're going to give you information about each activity and then some examples of how we could implement workarounds using other H5P activities that are more accessible. Next slide, please.
Slide 20.
So on the link, and I think Joshua was going to put this link in the chat for the H5P accessibility status by activity type. It also will take you in Studio, once you have your account, to the different pieces of the information for H5P accessibility. We looked at the activities kind of under 6 guidelines, whether they supported visible indication of focus, color contrast, keyboard usability, that there were no keyboard traps, the support for magnification, and that was both at the 200% level for resizing text and the 400% level magnifying when on a smaller kind of screen. And then the usability with screen reading software. And other types of assistive technology or users, if they're not called out specifically, we chose these guidelines because they capture a lot of the same kind of baseline accessibility experience. And on the screen, the screenshot, we have an example of what is available for users in LibreStudio. There's an option to either filter or search for a specific H5P activity type. And then we have a table with the icon for the activity type, the name, and a link to creating an activity type, and the overall usability summarized in this table. So for example, the accordion H5P activity type is rated usable with workarounds, while the advanced fill in the blanks activity type is rated overall usability requires alternative activity. And again, the full list is available on the link that Joshua just shared and on the link in the presentation slides. Next slide, please.
Slide 21.
So when we, in particular, when there are H5P activities that are rated requires an alternative activity, we created some examples of how an author might use still another H5P activity that is usable with best practices or even usable with workarounds to provide users with an option. And we'll be talking shortly about ADAPT, but the LibreTexts ADAPT homework system does support the content author either creating or using activities or questions that have an accessible alternative. So if somebody goes through and makes sure they can cover all the bases, they can give students the option of choosing the accessible version or the more accessible version over something that we know is going to require an alternative. So the example that we have first is an example of the H5P marks the word activity. And so here we have a question, please identify the signs of respiratory failure. And there's a sentence, signs and symptoms of respiratory failure include, and I am not good with the pronunciation of some of these words, so I apologize to those technical people. I'm about to butcher this. Signs and symptoms of respiratory failure include dyspnea, fever, tachypnea, bradycardia, tachycardia, diaphoresis, and nausea. So Fortunately, they're also spelled out in the activity. And so the idea here would be that a student would use the mouse or keyboard to pick from the list of 7 terms to pick which of those terms actually are signs of respiratory failure. However, this particular type of H5P activity is not usable with screen reading software, and there are no programmatic headings to give structure to the content. So for the headings in particular, LibreText has the option of using a container box, and that will add the heading. Then you can add the heading in LibreText. So the heading would be heading 5. And then if you needed a subheading, you'd have an option for heading 6. So LibreText can put some of that accessibility back, but it can't fix that the activity type is not usable with screen reading software. So as an alternative, on the next slide, we'll share that with you. Joshua, next slide, please.
Slide 22.
Thank you. And so an H5P more accessible alternative for this particular question could be to use the multiple choice. And we've rewritten the example question into that format. So the instructions would now read, choose the option that identifies the signs and symptoms of respiratory failure. And then 4 different statements would be included. So the first one, for example, is signs and symptoms of respiratory failure include, and then there are 4 examples or 4 technical terms that I'm not going to try to pronounce again. And then so we have 3 other examples, and the students would read through and select which of these 4 choices has the right signs and symptoms of respiratory failure. So it's the same type of kind of knowledge check, but in a version that is going to be more accessible. It works with screen reading software, and it still has some minor issues with color contrast, but somebody a user who may be having issues using color contrast might not be affected by or impacted by the other version. So what we're giving users the option of is picking the version that is going to be more accessible for them, because again, none of the H5P activities, when we tested them, were fully conformant. So there are going to be gaps. Now, one other kind of update about H5P, some of the activities since we did the testing and rating have undergone some updates, and we're hoping that those improvements will start showing up, but we haven't received kind of a third-party report or even a report from the programmers, that they've gone through and done testing and verified that the updates make those activities accessible. And it's only been 4 or 5 out of the 50 that we tested. So there's still a lot of work to be done in this area. But the key takeaway for content authors, for faculty members, if you're going to be creating content and you really need to use one of the activities that's rated requires an alternative activity, you can use one of the more accessible versions, and then in Adapt, which again, we're going to be talking about in just a moment, will support giving students those options. And the next slide, please.
Slide 23.
And I think, Joshua, you were going to describe this one.
Yes, so this is the LibreText Adapt view, where it's a page taken straight out of LibreText Adapt, where it's scientific notation, measurement, uncertainty, accuracy, and precision, where it's express each number in scientific notation, has A, B, C, D, E, and F, where it's 711, and then it has an open form field, then it's B is 0.239, and there's focus on that form field, then the rest of them as well. So, but you'll notice that each one of them has the ability to add and edit content into it. You can type LaTeX directly into it. You don't need to know the MathJax symbols to make it accessible math. So if your users know LaTeX, they can enter that into it and it will be shown as an accessible math to the instructor.
And then just a little bit more. So LibreTexts Adapt is a homework system. So it's summative as opposed to the H5P activities that are formative that would be embedded or could be embedded directly on a LibreText page. It supports a variety of different types of questions, including some native question types, but also H5P, MyOpenMath, web work questions. And it includes page navigation, and you can organize the questions or the groups of questions by chapter for the course. And yes, so you jump to the next slide, right?
I jumped to the next slide as you were talking about it, because as soon as you said H5P web work, I moved over to slide 24.
Excellent. So some of the Adapt homework system accessibility features includes H5P, which again, there are more accessible versions and less accessible versions or types of questions. Web work, we're working with that group to improve accessibility of the types of those questions as well. MyOpenMath types of questions has done a lot of work. That organization has done a lot of work to improve the accessibility of those question types. And then Adapt has open-ended questions that we've developed to be accessible. Some of the third-party questions, again, may not be fully accessible. But as we've shared, instructors may select or create accessible alternative questions and then assign those to a student. So let's say you have a student who has made an accommodation request for questions that will work with screen reading software. You would be able to, as the instructor, identify more accessible versions of questions that you've developed. And then the accessible alternative questions, they may include some of the native types from Adapt, which could be auto-graded questions, or they could also be open-ended questions. And let's see, let's move to the next slide.
Okay, so we're at slide 25, where we have questions and answers occurring. So as you're thinking up some questions and answers to submit through the chat or unmute yourself so you can ask the question, I am also going to move over to the next slide and talk about what's on here, slide 26. So this is hyperlinks to the LibreVerse, where we have project organization and curation with a link going over to the LibreCommons. Free login account is the login to Conductor. Remixer, under the tools of sidebar, no account is needed. There's also the community and curation forums where you can query and do a free account, get a free account. The homework system, the summative Adapt has a link going directly to it, has a free account, request access code directly. The H5P assessment repository, we have a link going over to LibreStudio, free account using LibreFest 2021 code. Is that still valid, Delmar? Let us know if it's not now. Then there's also our LibreText Accessibility Checker email for reporting bugs, which is CKE LibreText at ucdavis.edu, because we're actually using the CK editor 4 in order to edit content in LibreVerse. So with that, I will end the slideshow. And I will bring up one of our, I'll share my web page.
And Joshua, we have a couple of questions that have already come in the chat. So let us know how you want to
ask. Let me get to one of them. Wait. First, let me share my screen. So this is our otter. So you can see what it looks like. It's taking screenshots of all the PowerPoint slides as well. And I'm trying to get to the chat to see the questions, and I will ask them. So we have, can you share? I will share the links as soon as I can. Are the math equations in H5P screen reader accessible? Nicholas, you want to answer that one?
Most likely, math equations in H5P are not going to be accessible with screen reading software because they're not in MathML. So it's going to depend on how they've been written. We'd have to look at some other examples. The scope of the question types that we had when we tested this a couple of years ago, I don't recall specific math questions in any of those samples.
We can use MathJax in H5P. I'm not sure if we have control over which version of MathJax, which of course has some issues related to it. But I do know that we can embed H5P. We can embed MathJax using predominantly LaTeX, although I'm sure MathML can also work too. I don't know about its limitations if it's outside of text blocks or expository components. If there are some conflicts associated with that, that might be an issue.
Thanks.
Okay, we also have another question. Would you recommend using the reader mode with screen reader? Would this also benefit keyboard only navigation users and avoiding keyboard traps?
So let me answer that first part.
Okay.
Yes, the reader mode is, we've tested it just recently using screen reading software. And all of the issues that we had with any type of keyboard functionality in the former view or the kind of general view, I guess, have been resolved in the reader mode. Now, there could still be keyboard accessibility or accessibility issues for screen reader users for something like H5P if it's been embedded, or if another type of video player was used to embed multimedia by the content author. So the accessibility conformance report for LibreTexts is for the platform itself, not for the individual content.
Okay. So the next one is also, will able player be able to pull a video from YouTube, for example, that has suboptimal captions, and then using the additional track functionality help support an OER author in providing more accurate captions or transcripts? Answering that one, I do not think so, because we do not have a way of hosting the other additional captions anywhere. Maybe that's something that we can look into, maybe address and answer back later. But as of this point, no. Excited about the EPUB exports. Have you tested some of the more complex types of content, STEM or infographics, as just two examples with readers like Thorium or Apple Books? No, I haven't. I've been playing it with mostly Voice Stream Reader and other accessible mobile apps that will play back e-reader content. I've been playing mostly with those. But there's not too many of them that are actually playing too friendly with math content when it comes to EPUB. So that's another thing to think about. So have you explored creating audio or multiple language versions of content pages generated using cognitive services and LLMs? Ooh, we're touching a touchy subject there. LLMs, yeah, I mean, that depends on which school you're talking about, because already some of them have banned it from their school campus, which I see very, very interesting how you can ban a digital content off of a campus, especially one that could be used to accommodate those with writing issues. Can we use the highlight text and adapt native as an alternative for mark the words? Ethan, Nicholas, Delmar, I am not sure. I don't think I've ever tried that.
We would need to take a look at it. I think the new features that Eric introduced for the nursing expansion adapt, I think, has this alternative capabilities for the H5P issue off here. I'm still a little perplexed exactly how you do it without requiring a mouse, but I need to learn a little bit more about that before I be willing to say yes or no.
Hold
I
on.
will mention that at least the question about the LLMs and the cognitive services, if you connect that or expand that to AI or machine translation, Eric can certainly comment on that aspect in terms of other languages, if that's something you want to follow back up on.
And
Right.
then
The question type, the adapt native question that Eric's working on, specifically that Delmar mentioned right now, the nursing type questions, we are in the process of making that keyboard accessible, and we're updating some of the settings for visible indication of focus right now so that it'll work. But that could be an option. So Delmar, I just want to make sure, once we have made that question type that's an adapt native question accessible, would it be an option to include it as one of the alternatives? So I think the question is, we don't just have to have an H5P question type as the accessible alternative, correct?
You can use any technology as the alternative, preferably an accessible alternative in order to make it sense. But yes, we can use any technology that fits in there for that.
Yeah.
And last but not least, we have a, sorry if I missed this. Are you working on exportable audiobooks? And I'd have to say a huge, large no. That's because we do export of text, and you can actually submit it through any TTS program you want, which also includes Speechify, which is some really nice voices that will read your text aloud. Volunteer readers could collaborate on recording audiobooks on possible models, LibreVox, Learning Ally, Mozilla Open Voice. That's sure. Those are actually different businesses that would have nothing to do with LibreText. Learning Ally is actually one of the services we've used in order to provide textbooks for dyslexic and blind students and low vision students here on our campus, where they have volunteers read that content out. But that's something that they would most likely do and provide as a service for the users.
I may mention something quickly about that, and I've been conflicted about this for a while. The one aspect that we try to build upon all components of the LibreVerse is to make sure it's dynamic. And if we do a lot of pre-recording of pages, it limits the ability in order to go in and start to update those pages for whatever purposes, whether they happen to require updating for fixing or to be more contemporary or something else. And it will, I think it is resistant. So technologies that facilitate on-the-fly translation, I'm far more supportive of than I am for recording for that purpose.
Yes, Speechify actually has some actual human sounding voices. They have Gwyneth Paltrow, you can read your textbooks aloud to you. So it's really cool. And you don't have to worry about a volunteer changing on you in the middle of a chapter, which can be very confusing when you're listening to those Learning Ally books sometimes. Now, on another page that am I sharing my page? Yes, I am. I think I'm screen sharing. Let me make sure I'm screen sharing the right one. So, Brave browser. Yes, there we go. So in here, I am editing this textbook right in here, and the CK editor came up where I have edit view, format, style, elements, and help. Then I have a whole bunch of little toolbars that I can interact with. And the very last one, little Da Vinci Vitruvian Man, I can't pronounce that, which is our accessibility checker. So you notice I hover long enough, the accessibility checker is there, so it's labeled. Now, if I press on this, I can choose all accessibility issues, and we actually have a couple down here, labels and abbreviations and color contrast, which are in beta, so they're not included on the default. But what this will do is this will highlight content that's an error and alternative text is too long. It's telling you the image alternate text should be clear and concise. Alternative text should be no longer than 150 characters, and it should be reviewed so to see if it can be shortened. And we can actually go through each one of these paragraph headers. Paragraphs may not be used for headers. These are actually, I need to refresh this page because my buttons have disappeared. So I'm going to refresh it really quickly. And then I'm going to discard the changes and go back into the edit, go into the all accessibility issues, recheck it. There we go. So image alternate text is too long. So as you can see, is it non-decorative? Is it decorative? So it puts a blank automatically inside of there, or change the alt to a caption. So that way it helps out our learning disabled students as well. We can skip over it, go to the next one where it's maybe suggesting that you shouldn't be using a heading as a or paragraph as a heading. But if you chose to do so, you can choose to ignore it and move over to the next one. And as you can see, it's pointing out a lot of things that it thinks are issues here. Where this one is also that one, it's italic, so it's thinking it should be a header. So it's suggesting that maybe you want to make it as a header. And as we go through it, it gives you can see it goes through 9 out of 19, 10 out of 19, 11 out of 19. It's just thinking that some of these are actually issues, even when they're not. So it's even telling us if there's a window opening inside of a new window, you should be informing your users of that. So it will take out that target view if you so choose. You don't have to worry about where it is in the code. It just does it automatically for you. Now, I also want to go inside of this other page where it's already being edited. You know what? Let me just refresh the page so that way I don't run into any kind of errors. And let's go inside of edit. And we'll do the accessibility checker, but this time we're going to do abbreviations. Nobody does abbreviations. And what's in all of our textbooks? Tons and tons of abbreviations. So inside of here, I'm actually pointing out, I'll refresh the page again. Discard changes. And actually, I'm going to do links and abbreviations. I want to point out something inside of the links here. Let's go skip that one. Link text should be useful. Actually, where's that one showing up? This whole page seems to have gone awry on me, because it should be pointing out more of the URLs. Give me 1 second. Oh, I will do links and abbreviations. Oh, you know what? How about this? I'm just going to do abbreviations this time. There we go. So OER, definition of OER. So I can say online education resources. And when I hit the quick fix, it's actually going to span that in the background. And so it will be seen by screen readers. And if you hover over it with your mouse, by those with learning disabilities. So you can know what any and every acronym is. And as an author, you can list any and every acronym in the book. It will also do let me do my links on here because there's a whole bunch of HTTPS links inside of here. And right now that I think might have broke on us. What it is it looks for anything with the HTTPS or HTTP and suggests maybe you should be putting text there instead of leaving the URL, which is very hard for blind users to memorize if they're listening to it, especially if it's all randomized code in the URL. So these are just some of the things that we're trying to automate to make things a little bit easier for a lot of our authors to fix, and it guides them through the process instead of giving them a report on what it is they should fix. So any other questions that came inside of the chat? I see none. That is beautiful. And whenever you're working within the CK editor, we do have the email listed inside of there if any bugs occur. So you can send a report on bug fixes. This goes over to the student developers and myself who are working on this. With that, I would like to thank you for having us present on the accessibility of our LibreVerse textbooks. And I invite you to provide any kind of feedback with while you play with the content.